Welcome to Hooked on Songwriting, the podcast where songwriters reveal the fascinating stories behind their songs and much more. Now here's your host, Luann Hunt.
We are very excited and honored today to have Umatilla, Florida native Zachary Westervelt on the program. Hey Zachary, how you doing today? So happy to have you on the podcast.
I'm happy to be here, Luann. I'm doing great.
That's wonderful. Well, I know that you have some really unique music that you're going to share with us at our upcoming Nashville nights. So we're going to get into that in a little bit. But before we do, I'd like to kind of ask you about your background and how you got started in music.
Sure. Well, I come from a very musical family, at least as far as musical appreciators. My parents, none of them were very musically gifted, but they gave me a very strong education in regards to, what was good music. I came up with a very good musical background, a lot of classic rock, a lot of 80s type stuff. A lot of oldies, and my earliest memories are riding in the truck with my father, and he was always playing some version of either it was old country or some kind of 70s rock or something in between, and that was basically my musical education. And learned a lot about music, learned a lot about the greats and their backgrounds and things like that. And I always just wanted to do what they did because it seemed so almost mythical. You could go from somebody just tinkering around on a guitar in your garage to somebody that other people write songs about. And I wanted to be a part of that in any way that I could.
I'm glad that your dad sort of exposed you to the music that was in my generation.
Well, yeah, I've always felt like I was born in the wrong half of the century. I was born in the early 80s, but I always felt like Ward and June Cleaver would have really got me. And I feel like, the musical education that I got gave me an appreciation for it. And I appreciated modern music and the music of the times, but it just, even as a kid, I would hear stuff that was, 30 and 40, stuff from the 50s and 60s and even earlier. And I'd be like, wow, this stuff is amazing. And it's nothing like the stuff they're playing on the radio today. And so I had a very healthy appreciation for the greats. And I kind of always have lived with looking one eye over my shoulder at the past because I feel like a relic from a bygone era, even though I'm product of the 80s.
Well, there really is nothing like that music that you're talking about. It's there was a magic in that time period that you can't really put your finger on. And all the artists that came out brought something different to the table, but it was exciting and it inspired us. And a lot of the music today doesn't do that. It's just like, oh, I've heard this before a million times.
Yeah, the music of the day seems very polarizing to me, and it seems, you know, to always want to take a stand and and stand on some sort of platform, and I to me music and there's a time and a place for that, of course, and I love music that has a cause and speaks towards something like that, but it can also just be fun. It can also be lighthearted and pure and true. And that's how people like George Jones was able to put out such a body of work using pretty much the same three chords for 50, 60, 70 albums. And it was, and nobody faulted him for it. And he's one of the greats. And he put things out inside a very small box, but he said a lot with it. And I think music can say a lot of true things without necessarily having to take a stand on an argument, or, all the stuff that comes attributed with the music of the day.
You're right. And honestly, life was a lot harder back in those days. I mean, we weren't spoiled and we didn't have all this electronic stuff. And, people were satisfied with very little and they had to work a lot harder for the money that they earned.
But
And
they
so,
seemed more content with what they had. They seemed
exactly.
okay with, I mean, and of course, everybody always wants more, but they seemed, you know, to appreciate what they earn and be thankful for what they earned, as opposed to now with the sense of entitlement that everybody seems to have. And I think that I think the splitting point for us as people was the advent of social media. And it went from the point to where we were all free to have our opinions and feel whatever full way we wanted to about anything. But suddenly we had a platform where we could let everyone know about how we felt about every fool thing that was happening in the world. And suddenly we started to feel like our opinion had more weight and was worth more than just how we personally felt. And I think that has spiraled out of control and breeds a lot of what we have now, where people cannot stand to, they just cannot bear or tolerate something that they don't like or they don't agree with. And as opposed to back in the day, when if you saw something you didn't agree with, well, you changed the channel or you looked the other way. But now if there's something that you don't like, it must be purged from our day. And I feel like we've gone way off the path. And you know, a lot of that is actually reflected in some of my music. It's just I like to put a magnifying glass to the times that we live in, and it's just we've advanced, but have we really? And yeah, so that was a long answer to a short question.
Well, I agree with everything that you said. And what I was going to say about all that was that people were making music back then because they just wanted to express themselves. They saw things happening in the world around them and they had that gift to write about it and they just
Right.
did. And so I think it was so genuine. But nowadays, everyone's trying to get a hit song and trying to get ahead and, seeing what song they can sample to, make a hit and on and on and on. So the
Right.
mentality is different. So when the music is no longer genuine, then the quality, of course, is going to be diminished.
Right. I mean, have you ever sat down with with the expressed intent to write a song? It never happens. And if it does, it's very forced. My best music has to come from a genuine response to something. Either it's a line that I've read or something that I've heard or something that I've seen, and I instantly have to respond to it. And I mean, you can pinpoint a lot of different things and moments that spawn different songs in my repertoire, and I can be like, I remember what inspired that. And it was in direct relation to something that had actually happened to me. And that's why a lot of people tell me that my songs have a truth to them, or at least a genuine quality to them. Whereas it doesn't just feel like, all right, I'm sitting down, let me write a song. Let me see if I can just bang out a song real quick. Uh, the bass player in my group, Charles, something he says about me, which I don't necessarily agree with, but it's a compliment he pays. He says that Zachary, you don't write B-sides. And I think that's one of the highest compliments a musical man can pay another. Is he just tells me, he said, Zach, you don't write B-sides. All your stuff seems like you are right, swinging for the fences, and you really genuinely feel what you're writing. And I hope that comes true with what I play.
Well, I think because you have a high bar from the music that you listened to growing up and what you were exposed to.
Yeah, I'm a big self-critic. I'll have a bunch of people telling me a song that I wrote is a good song, and I'll be like, is it really? And I'll still not be sold myself on it. So yeah, I'm the biggest critic of my own work.
Well, I think that when we are constantly trying to reach for something higher in our art, it helps us to continue to progress and get better at what we do. I mean, heaven help us the day that we sit there and think that we've done it. We figured it out, right?
Yeah, it's something my grandfather told me. And he's the wisest man I ever knew. He told me the day you stop learning is the day you stop dying, or the day you stop learning is the day you start dying. And I agree with that wholeheartedly. I mean, he read 6 different books simultaneously and walked 3 miles a day up until, a week before he passed away. And he was in constant pursuit of knowledge and self-betterment and just making himself out to be a better human being every day, when most people his age would have been like, all right, I've done it. Now is my time to slow down. And grandpa was like, if I slow down, that's going to be it. And I agree with that.
Well, you were fortunate to have such an awesome role model in your
Yeah.
life.
Oh yeah. Grandpa was yeah, he was Umatilla, Florida's Jimmy Stewart, I guess is the best way I can put him.
Do you have a song about him?
About Grandpa, I do not. I have a song about Umatilla. It's actually called Umatilla, but I wish I did. I would love to encompass my grandfather in some kind of song, but it's it's hard. I don't think I've got the words to describe such great a man. So I think anything I would do would pale in comparison to the person.
My grandmother and I were really close when I was growing up. She was literally my angel. And I always wanted to write a song about her. And over the years, I had made attempts and I just, I never did. And then one day, like years later, I was writing a retrospective on my life growing up in this small town in Pennsylvania. And this idea came to me for a song about her. And it was just so easy to write it in that moment. And I thought, all these years I've been trying to write a song about her. And suddenly it was like, it was just there,
Well,
right?
that goes back to, you know, tr and I've done it myself. Like my family owns a family cabin up on the side of Mount Pisgah in Candler, North Carolina, and it's my happy place. And it's where all my childhood memories were formed. And I had a strong relationship with my grandmother as well, and she's actually still alive. But every time I go to the cabin, I take my guitar and I'm like, I'm gonna get some big time writing done because it's just I'm steeped in nostalgia, and I mean, I'm just surrounded by the ghosts of family memories and just everything. And I can't write anything there. I will sit by this picturesque creek and the back porch with just a babbling brook, and it's just, I mean, every tool an artist would need to paint the perfect thing, and I can't encompass it at all. And it's just the matter of it. I can't, truth will come out when it wants to come out. And I think I'm stymieing myself when I'm like, I'm going to get something good at the cabin. Like, no, you need to just, it's that picture of Bigfoot, you take it real quick and it might be fuzzy, but you might capture, lightning in a bottle. So
Yeah, it sounds like your process is very much one where, something has to literally inspire you to write.
very much so. I mean, I find that if I don't write a full song all the way through in one sitting, and I go back to it or I try to add to it later, any addition that I put onto the song feels forcibly injected to me. And that's probably only to me. There nobody else will even notice that, but I just, even if I know how I was feeling when I wrote the first, 2 or 3 verses or whatever, I'm not in that same exact headspace later. And I find it increasingly difficult to get back to that and add anything to it afterwards. I'm a real one and done. Some of my best songs have come out just like you said about the song about your grandma. Just, I mean, that's some of the songs that people like the most of mine are 5-minute songs in my mind. It took me 5 minutes to write
It's interesting how that works.
it. Yeah.
They just sort of show up when they're ready to show up, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's why, when I joined the church a few years ago, I always told everybody that I do my main speaking to God when I'm playing music. That's when I feel closest to God, because you really are, when you're playing music and you're putting something out to people and they're accepting it and they're giving it back to you. It's There's definitely a religious experience in that. And it's one of the few examples I can really pinpoint of real feeling of the divine touch. Like, if you really want to know what it feels like for the Lord to clamp his hand down on your shoulders, it's like play for a lot of people and have them really listening to what you're saying. It's ethereal. And I it's one of the things that made me want to be a musician, because I would see them up on the stage, someone like Ray Charles or something like that, and they turn the lights all down low and the lone spotlight on him, and it's just him and the piano, and it's just he's laying everything out there like that, and it's that's how musicians go from being a musician to being somebody mythical, like the people that they tell stories about after they're gone. And I wanted that. I mean, I saw musicians as almost magicians, the way that they can control and emotion in a way. They can trigger things and conjure things in people, even if you don't want them to. Like, nothing, nothing burns me up more than me actually being moved or like enjoying a song from an artist I don't like.
Yeah, I know. Well, a song should transport you somewhere when you listen to it and create some sort of experience in your inner being.
Yeah, or else what else are you doing it for?
Right. And I think that's kind of getting to be a lost art, which is unfortunate. But again, when you're writing because you're trying to be famous, how are you going to get something authentic out of that?
Well, yeah, I mean, if that's your end goal, I mean, to tell a dirty family secret, it's like my songwriting started because as an angsty teenager, I had parents who would not get me therapy. I and coming up in the mid to later 90s like that, it was before the whole craze of mental health, and where people are really, nowadays there's a whole lot more understanding to people who have mental health issues and self-esteem issues and things like that. Whereas at that point, you go to my parents and you say like I'm feeling sad, they're like, well, shut up and study. What do you got to be sad about? And we were met with that kind of thing when we started to ask for help. And now, of course, things are very different, and parents are very in tune and watching for signs that their children, might need to talk to somebody or something like that. But that wasn't an option in my house. And when I found out that it wasn't an option, the next best thing to therapy was writing. And it didn't start as songs. It started as a lot of poetry and short stories and things like that. I loved to write as a kid, but I found that a lot of my poems were could be applied and had a lot of musical cadence to it. And some of those earliest of poems and stuff that I wrote as a kid have manifested in some of my earliest songs. But music to me was my therapy because I could get none anywhere else. And each song for me is an issue or a demon that otherwise would go completely unchecked. and that was my way of dealing with it, I guess, in my own way, of trying to work through things that had happened in my childhood and in my life, and when help isn't available, I guess.
Music is definitely therapeutic, and I know for me, it's been my saving grace throughout my entire life. So I totally get what you're saying. Now, how would you describe the sound that you create with your songs?
That's a tough sound to pinpoint. Because I come from such a patchwork quilt of different musical influences. I mean, there's definitely a lot of folk and bluegrass in there. I guess what you'd call these days what lumps into the Americana uh, category, um, but there's also blues, and there's also country, and there's also rock and alternative, and um, I've been called a manic depressive cowboy, even though I'm not a cowboy and I don't own a cowboy hat or boots. But and they say that my music can be quite cynical, quite depressing at times. But even in the depressing moments, it's usually with a wink and maybe sarcasm. A lot of sarcastic is a very good way to describe a lot of my music, just because I guess that describes me. All throughout my life, I have a black belt in sarcasm, just because eh, I think that's a fat boy's defense mechanism, really, is the best way that I can put it. Uh, when you grow up overweight the way that I did, you make the joke about yourself before someone else can, and that hurts a little less. And a lot of us big boys have developed some pretty biting humor over the over the course of our lives, and a lot of that transposes to my music as well.
Well, that's a good thing because I think people appreciate it when we show our humility and our vulnerabilities. There's nothing like that as far as people connecting with an artist.
Right. And I really, for the longest time, like I said, the poems and the songs that I wrote were just for me. I had no, growing up in Central Florida and from a very nondescript family with no real musical background and no real musical avenues, I didn't really have, while I would have loved to have been a musician, I did not have aspirations to be one. I was very pessimistic, very, yeah, this is nice to play around and bang around in garage bands and things like that, but nothing's ever going to become of it, nothing serious. And I felt that way for a very long time. And I actually have to credit Jack White with one of my first musical spiritual awakenings, because I picked up a guitar at 12 years old and took a single lesson, and I did not want to learn scales. I did not want to learn music theory. I wanted to rock. And sadly, I found out with my chubby little fingers that you don't rock right away. And when I found that out, I had no interest of playing the guitar because it hurt my fingers and I sounded terrible. And who wants to learn all these stupid scales? So I basically just put the guitar, leaned it up in a corner, and that was that until I heard Jack White in, I think it was early 2001 or 2002. And I heard what he did with such minimal arrangements, and it was amazing. And I was like, I want to do this. I want to figure out how he's doing what he's doing. And it doesn't sound like he's doing anything technically that amazing, but God, it's pricking my ear up. And after that, I had a drastic shift in in how I wrote. I went from angsty stuff to very bluegrassy, very country and rockabilly and things like that. And I discovered it's sad that I had to go through a whole goth phase in high school to learn this, that you can actually get out the same amount of aggression and negative feelings and stuff as you do when listening to heavy metal. You can get that same amount of aggression out listening to bluegrass, listening to country, or a good murder ballad, or a good, cheating wife story in a country song or something. Can get that same feeling out. You don't have to stay angry and screaming all the time, because you can get out those same feelings in a more, let's say, eloquent way. And that's so yeah, Jack White really opened my eyes and got me back excited for music again when I was about 18, and that's when I really started picking up and trying to do something with this.
So what do you feel is your biggest accomplishment to date?
Well, I'm sure you mean musically. Honestly, my biggest accomplishment to date is my daughter. Best thing I've ever done in my whole life, and the only thing I've ever been good at. But musically, my biggest accomplishment, I think, was, I guess, the first time I went to an open mic, which was less than a year ago, believe it or not. I played quite a bit in church and wrote a lot of religious songs and things like that. And then me and the church had a falling out. And after that, I went to my first open mic. And that was an amazing accomplishment for me, just being as shy as I am. I'm a very, very shy person. I don't like people looking at me. I believe it or not, as long-winded as I have been, in person, I'm very soft-spoken, um, very reserved, and getting up there and putting yourself out there, first singing covers and then singing your originals is it's rough. It's scary, and but the first time I did it, I had such a great response that it made me want to do it again. And it made me want to do it again over and over and over again. And in the span of 6 months' time, I mean, I've had the book of songs for years. I mean, I have about 95 originals, but in the span of 6 months, I've gone from playing a single open mic night to I played two sets at the Harvest Festival in Brooksville. We're going to have another set at the Americana Festival in Brooksville next year. Meeting up with the bass player who heard my originals, and he said, I want to be in the Zachary Westervelt business. He said, your songs speak so true to me that I want to make them more. Like I want to hitch my wagon to your star, which was flabbergasting to me. But because I never thought I would do anything with it. But to have somebody that I respect very much as a very seasoned musician who's played in other bands and has a very rich musical background, to say that about me and my originals, and is now like, hopefully in the next couple of months we're going to try to go into the studio and record a full album of my original songs, and that's mind-boggling to me. Of course, if I would have had this same bug 20 years ago, I might could have done, who knows where I'd be now, but um, that's amazing to me. And I guess I'm proud of myself for putting myself out there, even though it was uncomfortable, because a lot of great things have happened since then.
Well, that's awesome. Is there anywhere that you have music online that you can tell our listeners
Yeah,
to?
they can go on Spotify or YouTube or any of the places that they get their music streaming, and they just look up my name, Zachary Westervelt, and they'll see I've got about 8 originals on Spotify right now, a few live videos from the Harvest Fest that we played. So yeah, they got some content up there.
Well, that's awesome. Well, this has been really great to talk to you and hear about your journey. And I'm thinking here that you have a lot more to come, so it's pretty exciting, and we're just so honored to have you performing in that Nashville Nights on August 21st here in the Villages.
I'm excited to be a part of it. I know it's going to be a great show, and I look forward to putting my art out there, and hopefully everyone will enjoy it.
I know they will, Zachary. But anyway, thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you on the 21st.
Thank you, ma'am.